Hey, Strongminds, welcome to today's episode. Today we have a very interesting guest, which I'm really excited to introduce you to. His name is David. He comes from more of a corporate background. He has spent 25 years working at Microsoft, and we'll dive into this story, but he started with Microsoft when it very first began with the whole rise of the internet. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to share with that. His background, where he grew up with, was more of a spiritual background from his mother's base. So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say of living in the corporate world, but how he got back into yoga to kind of save his body and get back into the spiritual things. He has tons of wisdom and knowledge about conscious conversations and just the science behind it. He also has introduced and created his own tarot cards, and we're going to be doing a live reading with the tarot cards as well. So I'm really excited about that to get a little bit more insight as well. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited about just your story and where you've come from. Can you talk a little bit more first of your background, how you grew up, how you got into the corporate world, and then how you got back into spirituality?
Wow. So
yeah, that's a lot. I know.
But I'll try to keep it really short.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
And how it would relate to what we're doing here today.
Right.
So when it really comes down to it, the key thing is I've always had a drive for trying to figure out why people do what they do. It's really people have natural tendencies to doing things. And so I've listened, I've observed, and I try to figure out those little nuances between what they're doing and why they're doing it. Kind of the difference between doing something consciously and doing something that's just habit forming or subconscious. There's just something that you've done forever. It's what the culture does. It's just what they do. You do it too. And so that was things that I got introduced to when I was, 11, 12, 13. At that time, my mom got into astrology, and then I got introduced to tarot cards and I Ching and Ouija board and just anything and everything related to that. I grew up in South Seattle, so we went from South Seattle into town back in the days when Seattle was really small. And we went to a spiritual camp, and we went to a spiritual church, and we got together with all these people that on a regular basis did things like channeling and the medium work. And this was all during that was the early 70s. Early 70s. So if you think of the culture of the time, we had just come out of the hippie era.
Right.
Okay. And so that new age type was starting to bloom. That today is mature. Okay. So it's a totally different today when you think of a new age hippie versus an original hippie. Totally different mindsets. Today we have technology. Today we have all this cool stuff that's available to us. Back then, we had to make it. And so back then, there was a period of time where I went and studied that. I went to all these different meetings from all these different people that were traveling the world, the gurus that would come here, and they would have their meeting and they would be on the schedule. So today we do the same thing. We'll go to a meeting, but there'll be 100 people there. Back then, there'd be 5 people there. There'd be 10 people there that would show up for this. And I got to ask the questions. I got to interact with them. I got to experience. They would do the event rather than talk about the event.
Interesting.
Okay. And so I got this aspect of doing. And then it took me into my teen. I got out of high school. I was a hippie for a little while. I had this aha moment when I was at a book meeting with a bunch of spiritual-based people. And the light bulb went off saying, I don't have to be a hippie to have a spiritual life.
Okay.
I turned around and went to college. Shortly thereafter, I got through college. I got into Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for 25 years.
Yeah.
It's been 3.5, 4 years since then. And I worked on the technologies that I worked on. I worked on Windows. I got hired in Windows in the early days. I did low-level Windows stuff, the memory management stuff. I worked my way into audio. I did audio stuff. I worked my way into video. So the technologies that you're using to do this type of stuff, I was involved in the bottom level of that. I was involved in making sure that it worked properly. There was one really thing I have to share, a proud moment that I had was when we worked on Windows 95. If you can remember all the way back then, when they first introduced plug and play, where you just plug in something and pull it back out. Okay, and it worked. I was involved in the group that helped do that. There was about 40 of us involved on that team. And the thing that evolved out of that for me was I got to work with a couple of people that designed technologies that radically changed hardware. So in other words, we wrote tests that went out and burned up hardware. Hardware vendors fixed that, reported stuff, and then the industry worked. All of a sudden, come Windows 96, Windows 97, people started loving their computers. They no longer had to deal with that hard technology issues. And so anyway, here we are today. And now that I've left Microsoft, detox from the corporate setting. It took years of yoga to get through work because of the stress involved. I went to yoga to remove the stress, to just breathe, to just move, to feel the energy flow again. And it got me through those hard stress days until I got to the point where, well, now that I'm not Microsoft, I got to create my own tarot deck, and we get to work through that. I got to write my tarot book. I do astrology studying now. I hang out at the coffee shop. I talk philosophy with people when they want to.
Right. I love it. A couple questions just from your story that kind of popped up. What advice do you have for people who are in the corporate world that love their job and are passionate about their job, but how do they find that balance of staying true to their body? Like you were saying, like yoga was a place for you to find your breath. What advice do you have for people who, like the corporate rush and grind that it has, but how do you manage that balance of being honoring to your body while at the same time honoring to your job?
You have to also honor your routine. Okay, and so what it comes around to is, for me, when I first got into it, I thought, well, what can I do? What can I do? How can I make this work? And so I looked at the schedule. I said, it's like there's 30 different astrology or yoga teachers that I could go to, but which one works with my routine? So I said, okay, I can commit to getting up a half hour earlier. Now I can commit to moving my getting prepared time to my office. My office had a shower. I could basically get up a half hour earlier. I can do that. I went to a class that was perfect time to fit in that hour, and then I did my preparation for work after that. So now it was part of my routine. It wasn't that it was hard for me to do. I would simply set the alarm a little bit earlier and do my routine. Nice. And if you do that, so in other words, if you schedule your workout at 2 in the afternoon, and it just so happens that all your meetings happen between 1 and 3, what's the probability you're ever going to get there?
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so you have to change it to where you know that you can show up. When you show up, all of a sudden you can survive. And that's what I did with yoga.
I love it. And it sounds like it was just like small little tweaks. It wasn't like this big like change or anything like that. It was just a small little change within your schedule of like the 30 minutes and finding where you can sneak it in. Is that right?
Yes. And so you have to be committed to going to. I mean, you have to show up. With anything you do in life, you have to show up. If you love your job, you show up.
Right.
If you love your family, you show up for your family stuff.
Right.
It's like you just have to bring it in and do it. And that's no matter what that physical activity is that you're doing, make the time to show up, work it into your schedule, and commit to it. And it doesn't have to be every day, but generally working for physical movement, if it's every other day, generally you can do it. You can handle it. Just 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah, that's all all you need. You mentioned a little bit about the spiritual gatherings by the gurus and how they were smaller versus compared to now where it's a bigger audience, and now it's more of just a talking aspect versus what you said that there's doing. And I know from my own journey, I feel like there's a lot of talking, and then here I am hosting a podcast,
a talk show.
Yeah, basically. But what's the difference of then and now and the importance of doing the work? Because I think sometimes we can get just so caught up in just listening and being like, oh, I'm spiritual because I listen to this, or I'm tuned in because I'm dialed into this channel, or whatever it is. what's the difference between listening and then actually doing?
So when it really comes around to it, it's participation in it. You're actively doing it. So relate that to your emotions. So when it comes to your emotions, you do your emotions. You put out your emotions. You people can feel when you're excited or when you're mad. Okay, because you're doing that. You're putting out the emotions. The spiritual work that most people do when they approach this on, well, today, is that they're listening. And when they listen, they're not generating the emotions. They're feeling the other person's emotions. They're feeling what the other happening around them. Okay, so it's a two-way conversation. We want it to go both ways. Okay, so you show up at a conference and you are listening the whole time and you get to feel what they do. Okay, whereas what we really want to do is we want to practice. We want to put the spiritual routines in practice. So when you go to something that we talk about opening your heart, well, you want to open your heart. Well, if you hear somebody talk about, here's what you do, here's how you do these things, well, just do it. We're going to do it rather than talk about it.
Yeah.
So it related to physical activity, it's like I can talk about yoga all day long.
Right.
I can talk about all the postures, but until I actually set aside the time to go do it, I don't get to experience it.
Right.
Okay, so it's just that simple. That's the difference. So when they would show up back then, we would have the meditation. They would walk you through the meditation, and you would do it, and you would feel it, and they would correct you if you're feeling it right or feeling it wrong. Okay, how are you? What are you doing?
Right.
Let's go through that whole process. So it's kind of like when you show up for physical activity. You know, you go to yoga. The yoga instructor, if they're aware of what you're doing, they're going to show up and they're going to correct you, or they're going to ask you if you feel like you're doing it okay. And then you can get that interaction that occurs.
Right.
If you're going to a trainer, they're going to be paying attention to you. How are you moving? Are you working? Are you sweating? Are you in pain?
Yeah.
They're going to change it so that you get to interact the right way.
So do you think there's too much talk in our society now versus doing?
It really comes around to personalities of people. There's a percentage of people that are really doers. There's a percentage of people that are not. There's a lot of percentage of people that just interact and say they do when they don't really do it. And so it just depends on what you want to do. It's your experience. You know, we get to choose whatever we want to do.
Interesting. Okay.
And
Cool.
I tend to go towards what I feel happy about, what I feel good about. What motivates me to feel good is what drives me. Yeah.
Which is, what is it?
What makes me feel good?
Yeah.
So anything and everything. There's all kinds of things that make you feel good. There's you need to for yourself. So I can talk about what makes me feel good, and you can probably feel it right now. What makes me feel good. So this conversation, this type of stuff makes me feel good. Going into reading cards, talking personal things with people makes me feel good. I can sense it. I can feel it. They can feel it.
Yeah.
When you look at it for yourself, when you go into things, it's really, really, really important to look at the emotions coming from within you in your situation. So this is a yoga talking. So you go to work, and there's two aspects of work that you love. You love working on the car. You hate doing paperwork. Okay, and so you go through the process, and when you find yourself working on the car, you find this emotion that comes out of you. You find this enthusiasm. You find this passion.
Right.
Those are the things that you want to be able to focus on. You want to be able to use your strengths. You want to be able to expand on that. You want to spend more time there. When it comes around to these things that you don't like, you're anxious about, when you realize that, oh my God, I got to do taxes, and that anxiety comes up, those are the things that you want to feel the emotion associated with that. And what you do is you want to address that. So yogically, we would come around to it and say, okay, I feel the anxiety. What is my emotion trying to tell me that I need to change with regard to this situation so that I don't feel anxious of it? Okay, well, it means do your taxes. Get it over with. Get it out of the way.
Yep.
Okay, you get it out of the way, and now all of a sudden, wow, my day's opened up. I feel amazing again. Okay, it's that type of thing. And so those emotions are your feedback system. That's the key to this.
Cool.
That's how we're going to survive it.
That's great. I loved your explanation. You and I share a client. We're not going to name her name or anything like that. But one of the things that I know that she gives me feedback of what you guys do and work on is when she's practicing yoga with you, there is, it's in a louder time frame of the facility that you're training out of. And you talk about the importance of really being in tune with your body. And there's times where I used to, when I was competing in water skiing, there was times where I could use those distractions and be like really zone in. But then other times within my practice with water skiing and stuff where I needed like that peace and quiet. When do you advise to have that distraction within your practice, and when do you advise to have that quietness within your practice? And the importance between the two.
Good point. So when it comes around to it, life never stops. There's always something going on everywhere.
Right.
And when it comes to yoga in a loud place, the image that comes to me is a video that I saw of a late 80s man wearing a white suit doing yoga in the streets of a major city in India.
Uh-huh.
And he was busting out all the moves. And here it is, all these people in the marketplace standing around him, but he's doing his yoga. So there is an aspect of focus that goes with that. Mm. So there's the key thing with showing up for yoga is that you need to be able to get away from what you think you need to do, that ego. You put the ego aside. And what happens is you just focus on what you're doing at the moment. The instructor's there to take you through that. And what you find is that when the place is loud, when there's activity going on all the time, if you're doing yoga that's intense enough, you're going to be within the body. You're going to be feeling the body. You're going to be feeling your position. You're going to be feeling your breathing. You're going to be doing that aspect. All these activities, these noises are going to be happening all around you. But when you get done, you realize that, wow, I wasn't distracted by any of that. And so you know that level of concentration that you want to have is there. Right. And so the same thing can happen if you're involved in the sport, is that you need to be able to get to where you can get in that zone.
Right.
Whether or not that zone involves a full stadium full of people cheering for you to get up to bat. Right. Or whether it's simply that zone is when you're talking about what you need to talk about when you're giving the presentation at work. Or how you're making that sale, or whatever it is. Right. You get in that zone. And so the yoga instructor wants to get you in that zone. That the physical therapist wants to get you in a position where you are not thinking about the pain, you're thinking about the movement. Or whatever it is. You want to get in that zone. Now,
so my question, do you think to help get people into that zone, they need to have that quiet space first before the distraction?
No, it's a matter of focus.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And so the same thing happens if you sit down to meditate. Okay. First off, you got to show up. You got to make it happen. You got to do it. And the second thing is when you start to meditate, you might find that the distractions help focus you. So I remember showing up for a meditation in a yurt in the backyard. There's a teacher in Issaquah that used to teach for the Hugging Saint over in India. He taught in her ashram. He lives in India. He works at Microsoft. And he gave a meditation seminar in his yurt in his backyard. The neighbor had the chainsaw going during the time. And what everybody found was that noise that was happening, a plane flying over and the chainsaw running, drove you to focus more at what you were doing, how your breath was happening, draw you in, rather than expanding you to listen to the birds chirping, to listen to the cars drive by. Okay? Yeah. So it's a matter of your focus, what you want to focus on, what you want to hear, what you want to do.
Cool. Awesome. I'm kind of changing and shifting gears more to the astrology stuff with this question.
Okay.
And we're not there yet to the card. Yeah. A couple questions before we get to the card reading.
That's fine.
Mercury Retrograde. I believe we're in that right now. Is that right?
Yes, we are.
Can you explain that? And then do you have any stories of working at Microsoft when there's been Mercury Retrograde and the technology and just what happens during this time?
So let's talk about Mercury Retrograde first.
Okay.
So when it comes around to it, the astrology aspect of things. There has been, for many, many of my years, I pushed that off for my mom to do. My mom does astrology. If you Google up Mahala's astrology, you'll find the website that I put together for her, and she does mundane astrology. When I was younger, she did personal astrology for people. She still does it for friends. But I pushed it into her realm. I said, I'm going to do all these other things. I'm going to explore around everything else. I'm going to come back to astrology. So in the last few years, I've come back to astrology. I'm spending more time there. Mercury retrograde right now. It's in Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. It knows no boundaries, so that anything and everything can come up. When Mercury goes retrograde, what it means is that things from the past are going to come back up now to be revisited. It's in Pisces, and it's also Neptune's in Pisces. And Neptune is at home in Pisces, so it accentuates that dreamy aspect. It brings in ideas that you've only thought about before into consciousness. You can think about it a little bit more. And so we also had a period of time here where the sun was in Pisces, and that's where it turned retrograde. So all month it's retrograde. So here we are, we're at the end of the month. It's been retrograde all month. So you've probably had, in the last couple of weeks, times where things that were emotional to you, that had impact on you in the past, you've had to revisit.
Yep.
And so we've all gone through that. And fortunately, the 29th, it turns direct again. And so those things where we've had to go revisit things, we've had to look at things, we've had to talk about things, because Mercury Mercury rules over communications, how people communicate. We've had to go revisit how we communicate about things that were emotional from the past.
Right.
In a nutshell. Now, thinking about how that worked at Microsoft, I really tuned most of that out when I was there.
Oh, okay.
I didn't use that to my advantage there. In that environment, it's really technical.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, I just know, just because sometimes technical stuff doesn't work well during Mercury retrograde. So I was just curious if you saw that within your work.
So talking about that specifically, okay, so my mom is a Virgo. Mercury's her ruling planet. Her technical stuff doesn't work well when Mercury's retrograde.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, now why is it? Why does it work that way?
Yeah.
Okay, so is it Mercury that has this influence over us? Or is it something else?
Yeah.
Where does the astrology come from?
This is a great question.
And that comes around to the consciousness of it all.
Yeah.
Okay, and that ties right into cards. So when you talk about the consciousness of astrology, my take on it is a little bit different than everybody else's. The other astrologers talk about, oh yeah, Jupiter is here. Jupiter means this. Well, when I look at it, what it really means is the influence. So it's the influence of Jupiter. It's what Jupiter represents. It's what humanity has assigned to the attributes of Jupiter. It's what the consciousness of humanity has assigned to the planets. Okay, that consciousness has been developed by astrologers over many, many years, eons. You can look back and you can see that there's astrological, there's these types of more consciousness-based stuff that you can find back thousands of years. Okay, what that really means is that the consciousness of humanity, subconsciously, has picked up what the planets mean to everybody. Okay, so now you're born with a configuration of planets. If you don't do anything conscious related to it, you kind of act like, you kind of do the things related to this blueprint that you were brought in with, which is the subconscious says, oh, this is your blueprint. I'm going to make things happen for you in this way. You become conscious of it. So you look at it, you realize what your chart is, you realize what these influences are coming your way. Now, all of a sudden, the subconscious is throwing influences to you, following your astrology, and you're able to rise above that. You're able to use that to your advantage. Okay, you're able to do things with it. So rather than being a listener going to hear the guru talk, you now put yourself in the doer position because you see what's coming your way. And you want to do something associated with that. So the astrologer would look at it and say, oh, look at that. March is going to be Mercury retrograde the whole time. They would say, oh, yes, I get to revisit these emotional things that have happened in the past. I finally get to resolve these. The subconscious is going to bring those around for me so that I get to deal with it. I get to find a resolution, and I get another opportunity. So rather than being this thought that's part of my humanity, that's part of my human conscious spirit, part of being this emotional thing that happened to me in the past that causes me anxiety or causes me a reaction in a particular way, it's brought back to center. I get to deal with it, and then I may be able to put it back to rest, and it no longer influences me in this, well, negative way, or in a triggered way, or in a way that, well, is subconscious. Okay, so get conscious control. So does that kind of answer your question?
Kind of. It went a little. I was just curious if you saw if there was any technical difficulties while working at Microsoft when there would be Mercury retrograde, but you kind of answer that with your.
So when you think about it from a mundane point of view,
right?
Yes, that will happen. But generally, it happens in the areas of the organizations that are susceptible to it.
Okay.
So now you look at Microsoft, you'd say, okay, Microsoft was born and created on a particular day, and it has this particular energy about it. And Mercury to Microsoft is in a really good position. Okay, it's not in a position that's going to be triggered and create conflict. Okay, now all of a sudden, Microsoft, when Mercury goes retrograde, doesn't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just that simple. And so you have to bring the two together.
Yeah.
Bring the two together. Yeah.
That's cool. Interesting. When you were working at Microsoft, did you have like a moment of kind of like an awakening phase that brought you back to yoga and astrology and the tarot cards, or was it just kind of like small little moments of awakening that led you there?
So the creating my tarot deck came after leaving Microsoft. So while I was at Microsoft, what it really came around to was that I was forced to no longer ignore the conscious teachings that I was subjected to, that I put myself in, that I studied, all the things that I, learned about consciousness. I was forced to not separate myself from it. I had to apply the practice. And in the area that, if you talk to any Microsoft employee, in the area that became the most anxiety-ridden area was the review system, the whole HR program. Am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? Am I performing good enough? Am I not performing good enough? Here, the reason for that is when you think about the people that go to work at Microsoft, when I got hired, and we're talking the late 80s, there was 2,500 people there. Okay, and so they were trying to hire people as fast as possible, and they were choosing people from all over the world. Okay, the visa system Microsoft got involved in that to bring people from all over. Amazing people. I work with people that graduate at the top of the nation in order to come to Microsoft and do stuff at Microsoft. And so here it is. I'm a local boy. I'm born here. I do consciousness studies. I go to a local university, and I end up at Microsoft, and now I'm competing against all these amazing geniuses. How do I survive all that?
Right.
Well, I've got to be able to address the anxieties. And so to me, addressing the anxieties meant that I was forced to have to use my consciousness skills, which is I have to be able to feel the environment between the other person and myself. I had to be able to work my way into the conversation. When the person has a cultural background that's Chinese and they think differently, I have to work with them, and I have to understand what's going on with them. I had to use every other tool that I had, which is all these ways of being able to feel their emotions, being able to feel the body, see the body language, being able to see the different aspects of what they do to communicate, so that we could communicate. We could get together and make that happen. And when I did that, when I used the consciousness stuff, all of a sudden, I was able to compete, or I was able to survive. It's not, I was able to do my job. It's really what it comes around to.
Yeah. So you mentioned body language with the different concepts of different cultures and just even how you communicate differently. Do you believe the conscious spirit to live within the human body and our actions that we naturally take?
And we naturally take what?
Naturally do. Like just even my small hand gestures, like that's my subconscious speaking?
Yeah, so yes. So when somebody asks you, how's your day's been? What do you say?
It depends on the day.
Generally, the subconscious reaction is, oh, it's fine. It's good.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm doing great. Okay. And so it's that type of reaction. So in the culture that you're in, you're going to have ways of using your hands. You're going to have ways of using your face. You're going to have ways of looking, your ways of thinking, pondering. You're going to have all those types of things. And so if you can realize what the cultural background is, study a little, take a little bit of time to understand that, you're going to catch the nuances that are going to improve the communication. Now, when Mercury goes retrograde for you, well, all these forms of communication that are happening, they don't all turn off. They're all there waiting for you. You get to use it. You get to do something with it. If that makes sense. There's also another aspect of it. That is the thinking, the thought patterns, the way. So not only do we move, and not only do we hold ourselves and dress and make ourselves up a particular way, that's culturally based, but we have thought patterns.
Yeah, dive into this. I'm curious.
Yes.
About this.
So when it comes around to the English-speaking people, they have ways of thinking that another English-speaking person will come along with that, and they have no problem finding that connection. And then you bring in somebody that's, say, from the Ukraine, or they grew up in the Russian Federation, okay, and they have, or even into Germany, because Germany kind of is in that same realm. The thought patterns of how their native tongue is German or some other Russian, version. The way they get to it, the way they put things together, flows different.
Can you give an example of how it's different? I'm just curious.
A lot of it comes from just experiencing it.
Okay.
When you sit down with somebody that's from that other location, and you have to conceptualize something with them. So you both have to create something. Okay, so you have to make up something out of thin air, which is, what we used to do at Microsoft. We'd have to make up stuff. You have to code something, you create something. When you get together to do this, how they go through that creation process, how they were feeling things is different than how we feel things. So what does that mean? It means that there's this Russian, German, Northern Asian way of thinking. There's a Chinese way of thinking. There's a Japanese way of thinking. There's an Indian way. There's a Middle Eastern way. The African, most of African there's so much English there that it doesn't really matter. Even when it comes to Spanish, the South America, so much of it is English-based, that European-based. So it's that the English that came out of European, or the language that came out of Europe, have a very similar way of thought patterns behind them. They kind of all think similarly. Right. Which means when you run into somebody from South America, you can usually communicate really well because you have the same thought patterns.
Is that based off of the language that we learn? Are the thought patterns based off of the patterns of their own language?
Why? I don't know. My experience would show that it feels different. Yeah. Okay. And when you feel your way into it, you'll start to feel the subtle differences, and it'll enhance your communication.
Interesting.
You'll be able to feel your way to the answer, to what they're trying to say.
Right.
And that feeling is feeling what their intent is, feeling what the meaning is, feeling how they don't finish their sentences. Okay, when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're close with them, chances are you hear those relationships where the person finishes the other person's questions all the time. Right. They know exactly what's going on. They're in sync. Well, when you take two people that are culturally different, the thought patterns are different. They're out of sync. They're flowing the light slightly different way. The more you bring that in sync, you start to intersect, and you start to find that you understand what they're doing at that point. So that's more of, I guess, more the philosophy than the actual example.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. That's good. Well, are we game to do the reading?
We are. I am. I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So should I share my screen?
If you want to. So before we do that, generally what happens with the tarot cards is that this is a consciousness study. So when the background for the tarot cards is that there are 78 cards, and with the 78 cards, they have a meaning upright or reversed, so 156 combinations, but they kind of work like ink blobs. So some tarot card readers will look at it and say, oh, I feel this from it. And they'll tell you the feeling that they have from the particular card. I tend to go to the scientific route. I want to get my ego out of the way. I don't want to say, I don't want to have to feel anything with it. I want to look at the intent, look at what the person that's reading gets from the card, and then dive into that a little bit.
Okay.
And so back to the tarot cards, when you look at the tarot cards, it's about bringing up something from the subconscious, generally bringing up something that you're emotionally connected to. And it either lets you work through something that you're having a tough time with,
right?
Like Mercury Retrograde, how can I do this better? Or, if I have a decision to make, how am I going to feel going on these two paths? Because it's kind of like, do I do my taxes today? Do I do my taxes tomorrow? How anxious am I going to feel? How am I going to feel in 2 weeks if I do it today versus tomorrow? Type thing. And so when I do readings for people, I encourage them to think about something that's emotional. If they don't have anything, we'll go find it.
Oh gosh, I have plenty.
Okay, so, and then the other technique that I use for everybody that's watching or listening is that because I created the deck, I did all the artwork on the deck.
Cool.
I also wrote the book. So on my website, my More Style Tarot website, I have all the cards there. And so when we talk, we have the communication, I draw the cards, we talk about what the subconscious is trying to say based upon what we find in the description of the card.
Okay.
So go ahead and share the screen.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, basically you've gone to my website, you click to register on the website, and because you're a member, you're going to get to see the full details of all the cards. Anybody that comes along and just registers on the website and they play on it, we never have a reading, they get to see the descriptions, the keywords, the main principles of the cards, the top little section. You're going to get to see everything.
Okay. And
of course, you can see all the cards there.
Yeah.
So what do you want to find out more about?
Oh God, I'm so nervous. I don't know. Do I say, or do I just think about it as you're going through the cards? How does this work?
So when you deal with the subconscious, the subconscious is going to take things literally. Okay. And the subconscious, so you think about a thought. I think about, how should I get dressed today? I'm going to go outside, and should I wear a coat? Am I going to get rained on today? And so my thought is, am I going to get rained on? How do I need to dress? Well, to the subconscious, what does rained on mean? Okay, and so does it mean that you're going to get wet, so you need to wear a coat that keeps you from getting wet? Or does it mean that the policeman is going to pull you over and write you a ticket because you're in the domain that's being overrained by political laws? What does it mean? Does that make sense? And so we have to be clear about it. So generally, if you keep it private, the tarot card readings tend to be a little more general. And so the more we talk about it, the more specific we can get, and we can draw cards for specific questions, which is what I love to do.
Do you have a specific question then?
Do I?
Yeah.
No, this card reading's for you.
Oh,
we're going to you get to explore something. Yeah, so generally it's not the question, it's the concept. It's something that you want to explore more. So if it can be business related, it can be personal, it can be relationship related, it can be a decision that you've been fussing with, or a product that you've been thinking about making, just about anything. Any idea? Anything come to you? Nothing come to you?
Gosh, well, there's a lot on my plate right now, so.
Okay, so if there's a whole bunch on your plate, maybe I'm going to draw a card for you.
Okay.
And we're going to ask the subconscious in drawing this card what it is that you should be focused on. So which one of these ideas, excuse me, which one of these ideas is the one that's going to be interesting for you? And so here I'm drawing out a card, and that particular card is 8 of Swords. So scroll on down, 8 of Swords. And this particular card is a card about, well, you've just passed it. So it's right here, 8. It's a lady that's bound, right top.
Right there?
Yes. So this particular card represents and it's upright. So it is self-restrictions. So fear of breaking free, indecision, paralyzed, limiting beliefs, the feeling that you can't break the thought patterns that actively bind you in a state of fear. It binds you. So in other words, there's something that you've been thinking about that you refuse to let yourself get into. Okay, you're creating your own limitations, you're creating your own boundaries, you're creating your own blindfold. You're refusing to get involved in that. Anything come to mind?
Everything.
Okay, so
first thing is just business.
Okay, so business thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to read into the description. So everybody gets to see the descriptions. So the card describes a situation where your own thoughts have captured your will and manifested a response in which you are paralyzed in fear. So fear. What does fear mean? Fear is something that prevents you from moving forward. Fear is it's a feeling that comes from within. Okay, so there's activities that you are doing that when doing that activity, there's a fear that comes up from within. There's a uncertainty about it. There's an anxiety that happens. And when it does, you're interacting with it, but the way that you would want to address the fears is that you want to learn about that situation a little bit more. You want to figure out what it is that scares you. The things that figures out where your insecurities are, figure out where your flaws are, figure out where those things are, so that you can address that and do that better, so that you're no longer fearful of that activity. And so you hinted at it was a business activity. So we're going to draw another card. We're drawing another card, and this next card is going to be for a descriptor for this. That's something that may help you figure out what this business item is. And the card that we're drawing is Ace of Coins. So there's it's on the bottom.
On the bottom.
Ace of Coins is the first one. So there's 14 cards. So there you go. So the Ace of Coins is a new adventure, a new business adventure. So it's as if there's something that you've been planning to do that's this new adventure that you've been holding yourself back on. There's fear associated with that.
Yeah.
And so looking at the cards, there's a new enterprise, new financial propositions, a financial opportunity, or the act of prosperity, because coins represent the things that you do in life, how you manifest things, what you bring in. It's that flow of coins. It's a flow of money. So this card suggests that there is a positive change in or a material manifestation of financial opportunity coming your way. So in the upright position, it's there, but we drew it as a descriptor saying, what is it that you're fearful of? And so the fearful here is of starting a new adventure, of getting that prosperity. Okay, is there anything that comes to mind? Is there something that fits that even better? Is there one particular task that you've been doing, that you've been focusing on lately? Still nothing?
Well, I'm hesitant to say. This is
Okay, so if there's something, so that's okay. I understand this is public. This is public. So, okay, so if you're hesitant to say, that means that you have an understanding of that already. So there is something that you're working on. Okay, and so these two cards do represent something for you. Okay, so now we want to look at it and say, okay, so you now have clear thoughts. So you can click off this page if you want, unless there's something that stands out on you.
I just like the words.
Which words? Which words?
The words
hope,
faith, purity.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk about those for a second. So when it comes around to this, so the combination that we have here, the two cards so far, we have the fear of wanting to get involved, and then we have the coins that comes along and says, you highlighted the words, hope, faith, purity, chastity, innocence, fertility. This is basically that there's hope there. So when this card comes in the upright position, it's generally a really good card. It is that there's this new opportunity coming your way, and if you can open up to that, if you can be the lily in this, if you can be the lily, which is pure at heart, this is the one that basically wants to approach this without wanting to make destructions. You want to be delicate with this. So we take on the attributes. Since you highlighted the words of the lily, those are the ones that your hand subconsciously was drawn to, which means with this business venture, this fear that you have, it's going to call on lily energy to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, and once you start to realize that there's hope and faith here, and realize, let that flow,
yeah,
then that fear is going to start to go away.
that's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Okay.
can I share now the business stuff?
If you want, or we can go one step further. Let's go one card further.
Okay, we'll go one card further.
So,
and then I'll just give the idea of what I'm working on or have been like wrestling with for the listeners after this.
Okay, so flip back one page, and the next one here is we're going to draw a card on. So before you tell your listeners, before you really make this public, we're going to go to the subconscious, and we're going to ask the subconscious, what is the most important piece of advice that the subconscious can provide you with regards to how you can approach the situation. So we have a fearful situation that is a new opportunity, that if you bring in the purity of the lily, you're going to feel better about it. But then what else can the card suggest that you do to make this even better? Okay, so I'm drawing that card. And that card happens to be the Four of Swords in the upright position. So the swords are right above it. There you go.
This one?
Four of Swords. So this is a meditative, a contemplative. It is a regrouping. It is a thoughts. It's your thoughts. And so here it's rest, recuperation, refill. So basically this card, the angel in this card, the swords in this card basically come around to saying that this is we're dealing with the realm of the thoughts. We're dealing with the realms of the mind. We're dealing with the mind is restless. So when it comes around to that first card, which is your fears, what happens in the fears is that the mind picks up every little opportunity and goes off and creates the emotions to go with all the run over the list. I can do this. I can't do that. I can't do this. I can't do the other thing. I can't do the other thing. I'm scared of doing this. I'm scared of doing that. And then we fester on it. Okay, and the opportunity is missed. And then when we come around to the Four of Swords, the Four of Swords is saying, just chill out. Four of Swords is saying, we want to go to meditative position. We want to calm the mind. So the card represents here in the description a change of mental capacity, the energy that happens when you are able to still the mind or sit without thought. So this is basically saying, look, the lily just is. Just let it be. The lily, if I'm not covering it up, just let the lily be. And all these thoughts that you're working on, just tone them down a little bit. And basically it's saying, just rest. So what else stands out on this page for you?
Discipline.
Discipline. So that's the symbol 4, right? Discipline, stable, reliable. So part of the meditative process is to apply the discipline. So the discipline, how does that happen? How do you discipline yourself?
How do I discipline myself?
Yes. So if you have a business venture that you're fearful of, but there's great opportunities there, yet the mind is all over the place.
Yeah.
How would you discipline yourself to get to the results of this opportunity that you want to get to?
I hate saying this, but it's more time by myself, like of really listening into what I know and been wanting to create. So I think I hate saying the word no.
Well,
and I think just with the discipline, what comes to mind is just being like true on creating that time for myself to create and to create that rest aspect to allow it to flow through me.
Okay. So I would interpret this card very similar to that. But not quite.
Okay.
So it's not so much the rest that has to happen, but it's the discipline. You have to discipline the mind.
Yeah.
So that what you focus your energy on, because you're all over the place, you're doing all kinds of things. You've got lots of projects going.
Yeah.
You need to discipline the mind so that when you do the activity that's on this business adventure, it's focused. You focus on it. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. It just has to be focused time. You have to be disciplined with regard to how you do it. Write a list down.
Yeah.
Stay on the list. Write your objective down. Stay on the objective.
Mm-hmm.
And the guidance, the angel in the background, is a little guidance. There's guidance there for you. So there's people that are there to help with the situation. Now, do you want to talk about it publicly?
Well, it's been funny because I've written a book, and I've gotten a lot of people asking me, like, when are you going to write your second book? And I feel like this is the time. I need to start writing again.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to share. I'm not going to share about what the book
What
will
it
be
is,
about.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So yes, so of course. So these cards do align for that. Of course, there's anybody that's going to write something about themselves,
Yeah.
anything that they're experienced with. Anytime you create a situation where you make yourself vulnerable, okay, there's going to be fear associated with it. But when you do and people relate to it, talk about an opportunity that's there. There's coin to be made there. There is this. It's a whole it builds. It's a whole new adventure. It's an ace. It's a new adventure. And then when this one comes around to it, it really is that discipline of putting it together. Stay restful, stay centered, stay focused on making it happen so that you can channel that most important concept of whatever it is for this adventure, for this book. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. This might be it. Yeah. We'll see how long this one takes.
Okay, cool. So how much more time do we have? Should we draw another card associated with
this?
this?
Yeah, we have about like 10 more minutes. So
okay, so you have this project you're going to be working on, and the subconscious is help you find it, and the subconscious tells you to chill out about it. Let's go for another advice card. So what does the subconscious recommend for you? Some personality trait. We're going to draw a card. Who knows what the card's going to be? What does it recommend for you to help streamline this process, to make this easier? A trait, something that you should do to really be able to make it to where you can stay focused, to where you can put this project, you can get this project going. And I'll draw that card. And the subconscious is saying, 8 of Cups. There are some emotional things that you need to walk away from. There's some emotional connections that you've made that you have to realize that it doesn't serve your purpose. So this card is upright. So it's letting go, abandoning hope, escapism, disappointment, abandoning withdrawal. So it's that feeling when you recognize that what you've been doing doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there's things you're going to have to let go of.
Yeah.
Okay. And once you realize that, this is an emotional thing. It's an emotional card. This is the 8 of Cups. The 8 of Cups is a card that generally suggests that we're doing the same thing over and over again, and we're emotionally committed to doing it that way. But it's time to look at it slightly differently. We're going to now say, you know what? That hasn't been serving me. I need to do what serves me. I need to walk away from the old habits. I need to walk away from that emotional connection that I had with doing things a particular way. Does that make sense? Do you feel that one?
Oh, but like letting go has been like highlighted throughout this whole Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, so it seems like when that card came up, it seemed like there was a emotional reaction that you had. Generally, when I do tarot card reading with people, there's cards that come up that create triggers, and they're emotional triggers, and so we can clearly feel that, and so people will feel that, and so when it comes down to it, this is the gist of a tarot card reading. When I do them for an hour, when I spend an hour with somebody, we might draw half a dozen cards or more, may explore a couple different topics, because once they realize that this is how it's done, then they want to talk about the most important topics. They show up and like, okay, I want to talk about my business relationship. And then pretty soon they're talking about, it's like, why am I this way with my spouse? Right. You know, it's like, and because they realize that the cards are bringing up things that they just wouldn't address, they wouldn't look at, they wouldn't think about. But they have such an emotional impact that they want to get through these emotional things first.
Right.
And so anyway, that's what it's really about.
Well, fascinating. This was fun.
Yes. And so before you close any tarot card reading, it's like, do you have any other questions about any of these, or something that came to you intuitively that we should address before closing it down?
Yeah, I guess I have more questions about the 8 of Cups, because I feel like that
Okay, so look at what's written. Anything
Yeah.
that stands out.
Childlike innocence,
Okay.
playfulness.
Okay. So the porcupine stuff. So the porcupine. So the porcupine, when you look at this particular spirit, it puts up protection. Okay, it's got these quills around it all over the place. It, you can't get to the porcupine. The only way that you can get to the porcupine is if it rolls over and you can rub its tummy. Okay, and so the porcupine spirit is that these things where you have to go out of your way to protect yourself. So so if it is that, if it turns out that there's this fear about getting into this next project, and you have financial opportunity there, that's a great adventure, that if you let yourself get into it, if you have the purity of the lily, and you stay focused and disciplined with it, then what can come wrong with is you really want to get past the rough stuff to get to the sensitive underbelly of it all. Okay, we want to get to where trust in yourself, that you can be soft, that you can actually expose your soft underbelly in this project and have confidence doing it. Because, I mean, when it comes around to it, that's what's real in any project that you're going to write.
Yeah.
If people can connect emotionally. You might talk about something that's 20 different ways to do a physical workout. But if they can't emotionally connect to it, what's going to drive them to it? So it's not about the prickles, it's about the soft underbelly. If that's the porcupine. Is there anything else that stands out in that?
Faith and trust. You kind of mentioned that a little bit. Trust has been a big word that I feel like I've been wrestling with.
Okay.
Myself.
And so what's not to trust?
That's a great question.
So generally, when it comes to trust on a project that you're doing with yourself, it's not trusting yourself to be able to do it. And then when you look at, if it's a project that you're doing and you have trust levels with it, where's the bar? Okay, does it have to be Olympic competition, or can it simply be real competition? Okay, so when you get out, so you have water skiing background.
Right.
Okay, so there's this level of perfection that you have to do to be in the Olympics. But my boss used to water ski every morning. He lived on Lake Sammamish. He would take his mastercraft out, him and his brother would go out. And it's about the art of skiing. It's not about how you can technically do it. It's about that joy of going through it. Okay, and so to him, he would explain the 20 steps to find your zen in how he skis. Okay, so it's there. That soft stuff is there. It's how you approach it. It's the lily, that lily showing that that there's this really soft element to this. Okay, so we got to close this down somehow.
Yeah. Go for it. I'll let you do. How do you close it down?
so I just folded up the cards,
yeah.
And when it comes around to it, that me, it's like if tarot's exciting to people, feel free to go get a deck of cards. You can find them at any metaphysical shop, and you can draw cards. And if you realize that you get your ego out of the way, and you do it just like we did right here, which basically means that you do something like bring up my website. You don't have to buy a book for it. You just get a card. What doesn't really matter. You draw a card, and then you go read the meanings of it, and whatever stands out to you fairly quickly. How does that relate to the question at hand? How does it relate? Think about it for a second. Feel it. And if you can find a connection, there'll be an intuitive aha that comes with it. When the ahas come up, the tarot reading is working. Okay? Cool. So fundamentally, that's it. Of course, that's the end of the reading, but...
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that with me.
I'm glad, and I'm sure that the vulnerabilities that you've shown here, everybody that comes to view this, everybody that follows you, will probably be able to feel that vulnerability, which again is part of sharing with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you do these? You do these in Redmond Monday nights as well, right?
Yes. So for everybody watching, if you want to stop by Soul Food Coffee House from
Yeah.
3:30 to 6 o'clock when they close on Mondays, I do free readings for people. So you basically just come in, find me, sit down, buy coffee, buy something from the place, and then sit down.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk tarot, we'll talk tarot. If you're totally into tarot and you just want to talk to somebody that's been doing it for a while, show up and we'll talk.
Yeah.
If there's an emotional thing that you're going through, I'll draw some cards for you. We'll make it work.
Yeah.
I also do these online. So if you look at my website, we book time. We can do it over the phone. I can record it for you. So a really simple way of doing it is we talk on the phone. I record it like I would do a video for YouTube, and I'll put you the phone next to the microphone. So we pick up your conversation. We converse. We draw cards. I bring up the website and I capture the website for you. You remotely look on the website, and we talk about it. Yeah, so it's
Fun.
Tarot's simple.
I like it. That's great.
It's not like trying to put together Windows to ship it out to the world. And I was like, wow, totally different things. It's not like that deadline and billions of dollars are waiting for that shipment. No, this is one-to-one, interpersonal.
Right.
It's touchy-feely. Nobody else has to see the video type thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else to add as we close up here for the listeners?
Yes, you have to do it. You have to commit the time to it. You can talk about it all day long, but if you think about how much time you talked about it, if you'd spend the same time doing it, you build the experience. You live life. You do it. You just have to do it. However you do it.
I love what you just said about building the experience versus talking about the experience.
Yep.
I think that's huge. And I know even with like the cards that you pulled for me, I feel convicted of like, okay, it's time for me to do again. Like, get back in the business and the game with some of this stuff. So
we didn't talk about timeline. So timeline's up to you to pick. Do you want to start when Mercury's retrograde or when you start afterwards? There'll be a point at which you have an understanding. You'll be able to apply yourself when it feels right.
Thank you for that.
All right. Yeah.
That helps a lot too. Yeah. Well, David, it has been an honor and a blessing for you to be on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your gifts and knowledge for the listeners. Listeners, we are closing it up. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it out with your family and friends. Give the show the 5 stars and a review. Other than that, I am peacing out until next week.